I think both sides had hot buttons that people were pretty transparent about, and I think Warren and his team did a nice job of helping us both find ways to get things that were important to us without queering the deal, whether that was around some creative earn-out structures, purchase price structures, etc. I think it took some hand-holding from Warren and his team to get us together and to get us to having a dialogue that at the end of the day got us to the finish line. So I think that the role that Houlihan played in helping us identify and find Louis Berger was important, but then also getting us to the finish line, because everyone wants to get to the finish line, but they also want to take care of their needs, and I thought that was an important part you played.
Thank you for that compliment. Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess as we think about that, clearly, now you can look back on it 1 year, and I'm just kind of thinking of a song that comes to mind, Kumbaya, and we can all sit back, but there are obviously some hot buttons that we had during the deal, and as we try to structure some of those earn-outs, and I'm always curious, because you sit on the side, obviously with you, Seth, and Kirk, and Steve, when we were going through some of those hot buttons, Luke, how did you guys handle it and think about it internally?
Well, I mean, again, I think we saw a company being led by Steve and his team, which we wanted that management team too. So I think at the end, there were hot buttons in the deal and stuff, but we all, I think, came to a resolution that we were buying a company and Steve's coming on board. So if we kept those hot buttons going forever and didn't come to resolution, even though Seth and Kurt were out of the picture, Steve was still in. So we wanted to make sure it worked out for everybody. So I think it has. I mean, it's been a great year. What we expected from Steve and his team is happening. So we expect more as we go forward.
Yes, Steve.
I'll build on that too in terms of hot buttons. For me, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about did I need a job or anything like that. It was about we weren't finished building the enterprise yet. So I kept listening very closely for, are these guys going to help us build this enterprise out to its full potential? I think I'm sitting in a $300 or $400 million business unit waiting to happen. We're not even halfway there yet. And most of that will come from organic growth over the next 5 or 6 years. We might get lucky and do a couple of additional acquisitions in the sector. But I really wanted to hear that. And I heard that loud and clear from the chairman of Berger Group all the way down through my new colleagues. And that was what was important to me.
Mm-hmm. I'd add one more interesting dynamic that I think people should sort of grasp onto, is that Steve was not only a manager here, he's a significant owner in the enterprise when we went to go for sale, and that added its own dynamic to the situation. But I will tell you this: it didn't add a bad dynamic to the situation, because Steve played that role incredibly well. But Steve, maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because I think your ability to balance being a shareholder but also someone that's going to be in the management team going forward was really artful.
Yeah, well, for all of us, it wasn't our first rodeo. About half my career has been as a C-level player in private equity-backed enterprises, and I'm still here to tell about it. But in 2008, when Seth came to me with that first opportunity of a relatively small company, like what could we do with this company, I was enthused about what we could do with it, and it looked a lot like something I had done about 10 years earlier. And I said, I think we can make a go with that. And I guess in the first round of equity, not to talk exact numbers, but I think I assembled enough family capital and other capital to come in at about a 40% position on the equity account, which is pretty unusual for a manager guy to show up and take that kind of a position. But I was enthused about it, and I knew that we could make a go of it. It turned out really well.
I think that it kind of leads into, obviously, the ownership issue and the desire, not just ownership equity, but also the desire to be a part of growing something and building something, and something that's long-lasting. Can you talk a bit about the integration of acquisitions? I think Steve and Kirk, sort of the integration of acquisitions early on, were there any items or investments that you deferred as a result of trying to position it for a sale, or any issues that altered your decision-making process due to timing? Then I would like to kind of work down the line and come to Luke and talk about the integration of the acquisition into Louis Berger as well.
Okay. Well, we'd had the baseline acquisition, and then We bought a second acquisition to enhance our logistics positions and some commercial opportunities. We started up an engineering company in-house to that. We had an international joint venture that we threw in for what I'll call gumbo lanyap. And we marketed very heavily. We kept trying to grow each of our contracting positions out in their channels. We improved a lot of management things along the way. There was a continuous effort at integration to bring the businesses together. We weren't quite done with that as well. We're still working on that internally. Indeed, now as we are working on integrating with Berger Group. Here's the good news. In a short year since we were acquired with Berger Group, I'll be in Washington, D.C. on Monday and Tuesday of this next week, working on 10 very specific contract bids that we're doing synergistically with 2 other units of Berger Group Holdings that our little outfit would never have been able to step up to the plate on had we not had those additional resources that we could put together as a combine and say, Mr. Customer, this is what we are. So going to market like that, integrated with other business units of Berger Group, to me is very, very exciting. Kirk?
So I'll just step back a little bit and talk about acquisitions from the board perspective. This company really grew from a big acquisition, and that's actually how Argosy got involved, was coming in after Seth and Steve had already started the company and needed additional funding for a good acquisition. But I think everybody in here that's done acquisitions knows that acquisitions never go exactly according to plan. And it can be for lots of different reasons that you hit bumps in the road. And for exactly that reason, even though we had a number of opportunities that came in front of the company that Steve had heard about that were good opportunities potentially for Ranger, it's an interesting tightrope walk that you make between wanting to be able to show a buyer like Berger Group that there is an opportunity to grow through acquisitions, and in fact here's a pipeline and here's some good companies that can grow, and jumping in and making that acquisition, which changes your capital structure, which may result in hitting some bumps and not making your numbers during the process. So I think it's an incredibly important aspect for the management team and the board to walk through, and I think Steve did a really good job of managing that process and looking at opportunities but not biting on any near the end because they weren't perfect. But they were good, and sort of lining them up so they were ready in case the new buyer wanted to execute on that.
Just a quick footnote. That second acquisition that he's talking about had a few speed bumps on it.
Yeah.
It did. It had some
They
issues.
all do.
Yeah, they all do. But we got through it. And that acquisition actually last year was named Deal of the Decade by one of these organizations. So we'll let them keep believing that.
Yep.
Okay?
The only thing I would add to that is acquisitions was one thing that we were obviously focused on, and we did many of, but I think some of the headwinds that Steve alluded to is when we went out to bid on new assignments and new opportunities, is that we found it was getting increasingly aggressive, the pricing out there in the marketplace, and people were willing to take on jobs at margins that were questionable to us. And I know we face in the boardroom, what do we want to do to our margins? At the end of the day, do we want to be a 10% EBITDA business? Do we want to be 12%? I mean, these margins were getting down at 5% gross margins on some of these. And so knowing that we were going to be sellers eventually and how we wanted to position the company, I think that definitely impacted some of the decisions we made in the boardroom about how fast we wanted to grow the top line relative to the margins.
And then, Luke, obviously you had a chance to due diligence it, spend time with the management, and now as the new owner, and when you're look back, now you've had a chance to integrate it. Can you talk a bit about the integration?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things for us in the beginning was getting Steve and his team up to meet with our board, so they got to know who they were. And then, as I mentioned, Louis Berger had O&M practices already, so getting Steve's business development people involved with our business development people and going after, as Steve mentioned, the bigger jobs. The bigger the company, the more your government clients will stick behind you and say, yeah, that company's got enough resources to take on a 5 or 10-year project to do it. And we've already done some jobs together, or bid on some jobs, and we've already done some work together. In particular, Hurricane Sandy. Steve's team was able to bring operational type guys that could get onto the ground fast, and Louis Berger has historically had disaster recovery expertise. So between those two, we were able to drive some revenue through the company.
Well, in every deal, obviously we talked about some of the speed bumps and hot buttons. Is there anything you would have done differently? Any challenges that you faced that you said, hey, I wish we would have maybe taken a different tack?
Yeah, I wish we would have sold for more money.
I wish we could.
Can I add to that? The market is changing so quickly that had we sold the company 4 months earlier, we would have had an extra turn of EBITDA. And had we sold the company 4 months later, we would have had an extra turn less. That's how fast things were moving in DoD services. So, as my dad used to say, take the cookies when the cookie tray is passed. Okay? Worked out real good for everybody.
It did.
Yeah.
I don't know. From our standpoint, it's been a great acquisition. It's what we were looking for. Maybe I should have waited 4 months and paid 1 turn less. But Steve's team has got the entrepreneurial culture that Berger has and has had since 1953, when Doc Berger started the practice as a professor at Penn State. And I think it's worked out well. Not really much I'd say we could go back and change.
Oh, good. I guess really before we open it up to the floor for questions, I guess, are there any other comments or thoughts that the panelists may have at this stage?
I'll just follow up with one. We have looked at, lots and lots of companies over the years. And when there is a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell, a lot of times they end up not actually getting to the finish line for 100 different reasons. And I just want to compliment Warren as well for really helping both sides to come to compromises when we had to compromise to get this deal done. And it's not an easy process to go through. Certainly when you have as many people as you do sitting here, plus lawyers that always get in the way, plus people that we're all answering to, whether it's the Berger management team and their board, and whether it's our partners or Steve's wife, whoever it might be. There were important players that were involved, and I just want to compliment you. Having gone through this with a lot of different deals, I thought you had a nice balance of pushing at the right times and letting things unfold at the right times. So I would say, I'd give you very high marks for that along the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I've got a kind of a wrap comment as well. First of all, we vetted 6 of the best investment banking institutions that specialize in middle market in our sector, and it was a unanimous board decision to select Houlihan Lokey. So we put them through a real grinder before we selected them, and I have to agree with what Kirk said, that Houlihan Lokey in our sector, in middle market deals, the best we could have hoped for. Secondly, you heard from Luke that just a little over a month ago, Louis Berger Services, Inc. acquired Hawthorne Services, Inc. in Charleston, South Carolina. I have to tell you, that's the first time in 16 years that I did a deal and didn't have to go scrambling for capital. So, it's great being part of a large company with the kind of very strong, clean, conservative balance sheet that Berger Group Holdings has. And then I will also add this. In 16 years, I worked with exactly 12 private equity co-investor institutions in multiple deals, usually clubbed with 3 or 4 in each one. And I'm not saying this to blow smoke across the stage here. The 2 best, in my very distinct, high-clarity memory of every one of those relationships, have been First New England Capital, parentheses Balance Point Capital, and Argosy Capital. I say that hands down.
Thanks.
There you go.
Well, I'd like to obviously thank the panelists here for taking the time, but clearly one of the other things I would like to say that you gentlemen paid me a very kind compliments, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, and likewise, working with you has been an honor. Each of you really came to the table and not only wanted to sell the company, but engage in the process. So when we did reach those obstacles and those hot buttons, I think everyone was willing to talk through those issues. And I remember one afternoon we had descended upon Berger Group. And we had the entire team sitting there with Luke and Nick and really, and your attorneys, and really just hashed out all of the issues, all of the obstacles that we saw in front of the deal. Now, I want to underscore the importance of getting in front of each other and spending time. I think that was when we really turned the corner and we knew we really had a deal. And particularly in the age of the internet and distant electronic communications, sometimes you forget the importance of shaking hands and getting to know who's on the other side of the table. And clearly that was one of the things that made this such a fun deal for me. And personally, really one of my personal highlights forever. So it was really good to spend this night, our anniversary, on the stage with the four of you. And I look forward to hopefully many more. So with that, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah. Question for Steve. Steve, when you were thinking about selling your company, were you prepared for the sale? Was your team prepared? Did you have to do a lot of catch-up work quickly to get ready? So can you comment on the preparation and how that helped with the sale process?
Did everybody hear the question? I think there's a real trick to when a management team is part of a sale process of keeping your eye on the ball operationally and participating, obviously, like you have to do in the sale process. We went through a lengthy sale process. The sale process was lengthened because the DoD markets were changing so quickly, and prospective buyers had to come in and make sure and double sure and so forth. So we had a lengthy process. It was the typical arduous process of lots of management meetings with, I think, 13 interested parties. So we had 13 management meetings and a whole slew of follow-ups. Oh, let's not forget that in August we had a momentary broken auction, but it revived thanks to Luke and Nick. So during that whole process, to your question, we prepared for it. We actually didn't have to do any special preparation. Here's why. When you work for private equity guys, a good management team, in my opinion, needs to feed the voracious information beast called private equity. It's almost the same as being publicly traded. You have a lot of reports, a lot of metrics and so forth. So we work to discipline business plans. We have a great-looking, set of monthly reports, monthly ops reviews, monthly financial packages, splicing and dicing every which way you can think of. So when it comes time to put together a data room and so forth, we didn't have to do a lot of new work. We just had the double hat through the sale process of managing day-to-day operations and marketing and everything that goes with the normal operations of the company, combined with, oops, here comes another management meeting. So it was keeping all that in balance. And I think the backup to that is we have 26 extraordinary general managers working in our field business units that are absolutely on autopilot. I mean, these are really, really solid professionals that are actually running the business where we deliver it. We don't deliver the business in the corporate office. We deliver the business in 26 locations, and those people out there are doing a great job with or without us. And then secondly, we've got a really, really solid second tier of staff below the top 3 or 4 officers who are themselves just fantastic folks. So at the end of the day, the business didn't miss a beat despite the distractions of selling.
I would just add to that, as a private equity investor here, one of our selfish attractions to wanting to team with someone like Steve is that he had done this 3, 4, going on 5 times. And so that's an art. That's a skill. That's in his toolbox, if you will. And so he talked about it like it was seamless and we didn't miss a beat. That's experience. That's what that was. And so Steve brought a lot of value to the table across many different sort of venues, operationally, et cetera. But exiting is a skill. And And Steve is, from marketing the company, from talking to the company, from articulating the business strategy of the company, and keeping his team focused, very well versed in that. So that shouldn't be lost on anyone.